there's talk of a new era of political violence, and the federal government is signaling very clearly that it plans to respond with full force.
That's right.
So today we're doing a deep dive into what looks like one of the most aggressive national assertions of law and order we've seen in quite some time.
Yeah, it's really a two-pronged approach. They're aiming to, tackle domestic political extremism, but also project military strength against threats right on our border.
And the administration seems to be linking these, defining a threat that's both internal and, well, external.
Exactly. And the tools they're reaching for legally and politically are pretty powerful. Our mission today is really to understand this rapid ramp-up of federal security action.
Okay.
And that includes designating certain protesters and foreign cartels as, quote, terrorists, and looking at the authority, like maybe even the Insurrection Act, that could authorize deploying troops.
And this isn't just theoretical. I mean, the news is moving fast on this.
It really is.
Just recently, after that fatal shooting at an ICE facility in Dallas, which the administration flat out called a terrorist attack.
Yeah.
Attorney General Pam Bondi promised a zero-tolerance federal crackdown. She's actually ordered DOJ agents deployed across the country to ICE facilities.
Right, to protect federal officers and property. And at the same time, you have the president escalating action in cities where he claims local leaders have failed.
He ordered troops to Portland, which he called war-ravaged Portland.
And authorize using full force if necessary. So this isn't a wait-and-see approach. It's active. It's a declaration that the federal government sees restoring order as its priority, potentially over local objections.
Okay, let's really unpack this domestic crackdown first.
Yeah.
Because the big shift, it seems, is moving jurisdictions straight to the federal level.
Yes. Attorney General Bondi stated, "We've entered this new era of political violence," and she specifically mentioned organized extremist groups targeting federal officers.
And the language they're using is, well, it's strong. DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin directly called violent protesters domestic terrorists.
She did. She didn't mince words at all. She pointed to things like violent riots at ICE facilities, assaults on law enforcement, and the terrorist attack in Dallas as the justification, basically saying the line for federal action has been crossed.
Right. And that terrorist label seems to be the key that unlocks this whole enforcement strategy Bondi is pushing, this zero tolerance.
Exactly.
She said if a protester so much as touch one of our federal officers, arrest and federal charges follow. Why is bypassing the state court such a critical move here?
Well, it's hugely strategic. From a legal perspective, taking prosecution federal means you avoid local DAs.
Okay.
In some places, local politics might lead a DA to maybe decline charges or go for lesser ones. The feds don't have that constraint.
And federal charges often carry tougher sentences,
Yeah.
right? Mandatory minimums, things like that.
Absolutely. Plus, you bring in the full weight of federal agencies like the FBI, which have, vast resources compared to local police. Bondi was explicit about wanting to avoid what she called some liberal state court.
Okay, so that explains the how, the mechanism they're using for accountability. And the DOJ's directive is clear. Go for the maximum.
Yes. Seek the most serious available charges. We're talking conspiracy, assault, civil disorder, and then the really significant one, terrorism offenses.
That phrase, terrorism offenses, it just changes the whole game, doesn't it?
It raises the stakes immensely. And to make sure this is coordinated nationwide, Bondi tasked the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, the JTTFs.
Which are those federal and local partnerships.
Right, highly specialized teams. They're now told to disrupt and investigate all entities involved in what they deem domestic terrorism. So the JTTFs are focusing on stuff that, maybe used to be primarily local police work.
And it's not just individuals. The administration is targeting the groups themselves. The president signed executive orders designating groups like Antifa as domestic terrorist organizations.
And that formal designation, that's the legal groundwork they need to justify deploying federal troops, especially to places like Portland.
To protect federal buildings.
Exactly. From attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists, as they put it. Once you label an entity a terrorist organization, domestically or internationally, it unlocks a whole different set of legal tools.
Like what kind of tools?
Things like enhanced surveillance, freezing assets, much tougher prosecution powers. Things usually reserved for, groups like Al-Qaeda. It fundamentally changes how the government views and confronts domestic political conflict.
Okay, so we see the legal shift, the mechanism. but how do they justify using this kind of, well, overwhelming federal power inside the U.S., within states? It seems to circle back to that core idea of law and order.
It does. The main argument from supporters is that law and order isn't just a slogan, it's a necessity. They argue for harsher enforcement, tougher penalties, all to restore public safety.
And they frame it as tradition.
Right. They emphasize that restoring order is an American tradition, basically saying that when things get chaotic, federal power has historically stepped in and should step in.
But it's not just about protecting federal property, is it? There's this undercurrent that local politicians have failed.
That's a key part of the argument. Sources supporting the federal action claim the worst violence happens where local leaders have, quote, at least tacitly supported the rioters.
Making federal intervention the only option, in their view.
Precisely. The federal government says, look, we have a duty and the authority to protect federal assets like courthouses, ICE facilities, regardless of what local officials think or do.
Okay.
And advocates also stress that federal power actually goes deeper than just protecting buildings. They point to the Insurrection Act.
The Insurrection Act. That sounds serious. It's not used often, is it?
Extremely rarely. But it's on the books. And it essentially gives the president the power to deploy active duty military domestically.
Wow. Even if the state governor doesn't want them.
Even without the governor's request or consent, yes. If the president invokes it, it's usually in a situation where civil order has completely broken down and the federal government decides it has to override state control to restore peace. It's a massive step.
So that potential authority brings us to the historical precedents they cite. How do proponents justify this level of federal action by looking back?
They pull examples from across U.S. history, really. The first one often mentioned is President Washington putting down the Whiskey Rebellion back in 1794.
Okay.
He used militias to enforce federal tax law against armed resistance. That really set the stage for using federal force against, domestic political challenges.
So enforcing federal law over local opposition, a direct parallel they draw?
Absolutely. Then they jump forward to the Civil Rights era, the 1950s. They cite federal intervention, like sending troops to enforce desegregation in schools.
The argument being federal power protected constitutional rights when states wouldn't or couldn't.
Exactly. Protecting citizens when state authorities or, frankly, mob violence stood in the way. And then, more recently, they point to 1992, the L.A. riots.
President H.W. Bush sent in federal troops then.
He did. The argument there is that sometimes overwhelming federal force is needed immediately when local law enforcement is clearly overwhelmed, just to stop the violence and restore basic order.
So looking at history, this administration positions itself as continuing a tradition. And they seem to have ways to pressure local leaders, too.
Oh, definitely. It's not just the threat of deploying force. There's also the power of the purse. The potential withdrawal of significant federal grants and other funding is a huge lever to try and compel cooperation from reluctant mayors or governors.
So the message is accountability.
Right. Order demands accountability, as they say, from law enforcement, from prosecutors, from elected officials at all levels.
Okay, so that's the domestic strategy. How does this law and order designation-heavy approach translate to the border and, well, beyond?
It's actually a pretty direct extension of the same logic. The administration is applying this forceful law and order concept right to the border, specifically targeting transnational crime.
No.
President Trump designated some cartels operating in Mexico as foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs.
Okay, similar to the Antifa designation domestically, but for foreign groups.
Exactly. And the argument is these cartels pose an existential threat, mainly through drug trafficking, like fentanyl, and their influence over migration flows.
And just like the domestic designation, labeling them FTOs must unlock different authorities.
It does, big time. The FTO designation dramatically expands the legal consequences for anyone providing material support to these cartels. Think seizing assets, denying visas, travel bans.
But does it go further than that? We're talking about groups in another country.
This is where it gets really significant. It shifts the view of cartels from purely criminal enterprises towards something more like, well, enemy combatants. It provides a legal justification for considering military options.
And this is actually changing military thinking.
It appears so. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth talked about the military shifting toward an understanding of homeland defense on our sovereign territorial border.
Homeland defense, that's military language, not law enforcement language.
Precisely. It frames the border situation not just as policing or interdiction, but as defending U.S. territory against hostile acts, essentially. Acts like, drug trafficking causing mass casualties or violence spilling over it. It implies a potential military response is appropriate.
Which leads to the really startling part. Hegseth was asked directly about potential military strikes inside Mexico against these FTOs.
And he didn't back down. He stated, quote, "All options will be on the table."
All options, including military action in another country.
That's the clear implication. He argued that kind of aggressive, maybe even preemptive action might be necessary to, quote, "solve the problem of fentanyl," which is causing, devastating overdose numbers in the U.S.
So the FTO designation could essentially greenlight military operations against cartels deemed to be specifically targeting Americans on our border.
That seems to be the rationale. It blurs the line significantly between fighting crime and, well, something closer to warfare against non-state actors perceived as direct threats.
So wrapping this up, what does all this mean for you, the listener? This dual-focus domestic and foreign, this aggressive stance?
Well, I mean, the big picture is the federal government is making a very strong commitment to using its power to restore public order, both inside the U.S. and at the border.
Two fronts, same strategy.
Pretty much. Domestically, it's federal prosecution, terrorist designations for groups like Antifa. Internationally, it's FTO designations for cartels and reframing the border as a homeland defense issue. In both cases, that terrorist label is the key that justifies a much more powerful, potentially militarized federal response.
And you mentioned consequences earlier. One immediate effect of deploying troops domestically, like the National Guard, is something called the chilling effect. What is that exactly?
Right. So when you put armed troops on city streets, the data suggests it acts as a very strong, very immediate deterrent.
How so?
Foot traffic tends to drop. Businesses might see sales decline because people just, stay away from the area. But critically for the government's goal, criminal activity also drops. People are less likely to riot or commit violent acts with soldiers standing right there.
So the streets get quieter, order is restored, at least temporarily.
Yes, temporarily. It achieves that immediate goal of suppression.
Which brings us back to that core idea they keep stressing, restoring order as an American tradition. But it does raise a fundamental question.
It absolutely does.
When local authorities are seen as failing, perhaps spectacularly, to maintain safety, and maybe federal functions are threatened, does the kind of temporary order and accountability that federal, even militarized intervention brings, does it justify the potential costs?
Costs to what?
Well, costs to normal civil life, to local autonomy, maybe even that delicate balance between liberty and security we're always trying to strike.
That really is the profound question here, isn't it? It's a debate as old as the country. And right now, it seems this administration is answering that question with full force.